General Jack Keane with us right now. General, always good to have you. What do you make of this criticism that NATO is certainly talking the talk, and they're certainly very united about going after Russia, but when it comes to delivering the actions, like SWIFT, they're not doing that. What do you make of it?
Well, I think there are some issues with NATO. Certainly, Putin's comments concerning the former Soviet republics that are now NATO nations and threatening those nations got everybody's eyebrows raised, to be sure. And that is why the U.S. has deployed additional forces. That's why they're alerting the NATO response force of some 40,000. Remains to be seen what actually gets deployed and where it goes. The concern we have about NATO is, yes, it is its unity, and obviously when it comes to applying sanctions, they're not unified on certainly hitting the energy sector, which they're so dependent on themselves coming out of Russia. They're not unified on the telecommunications financial system, and likely on a couple of other lesser ones as well. There's still opportunity, I think, for that unification to come, but certainly I understand the criticism of it. My concern is actually greater than that, and it has to do with the preparedness of NATO forces and the effectiveness of having a deterrence against Russia. And I'm much concerned about the Baltics because I think they're the most vulnerable. They're small countries, small militaries, very close proximity to Russia. They have Russian-speaking minorities in those countries. And I've played war games as part of a congressional commission dealing with Russia seizing those countries. And it's really quite alarming, the ease with which they would be able to do it and how challenging it is to bring the United States military back to Europe to fight a war against Russia when they can take down the arrival airfields that we would use and the arrival ports that we would use in a conflict situation. So there are real issues inside of NATO, Neil, for having an effective deterrence. Their budget is a factor. We got to build real capacity here. And I think most of the deployment to the Eastern European countries that I think will take place as a result of Putin's adventurism here, most of that should come from European countries. The United States cannot afford to build up its forces any further than what we've already done in Europe when we have this major threat in the Indo-Pacific region dealing with China, and we already know that we're outgunned and outmanned there, and we don't have the military deterrence there that we used to have years ago, and we have to catch up to it. And these budgets are really important, as these threats are certainly illuminating, I think, to the American people that we have serious problems here with Russia and also with China.
So, General, what do you make of these reported overtures on the part of Vladimir Putin that he's open to talks with Ukraine? What did you make of that?
That he's hoping to do what with Ukraine?
To talk. He's open to talks.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's two paths ahead here. There's going to be a transfer of power. And do you negotiate that transfer of power and do it without force, which is essentially a surrender? Or does it take place with the use of force? So that's the path that we're on here. I think President Zelensky has much to do with what path he wants to select to do that, whether he's willing to put up with a peaceful transfer of power, which essentially would be a surrender, or is he going to hold on and go down the road that this will be forced and taken away from him? I don't think that determination has been made yet, but that's the path we're on. Russia will also militarily be consolidating their gains, and they have real challenges. Even day two here, they still have some serious problems with the Ukraine military and the stiffness of the resistance that they're meeting out there. But eventually, after the transfer of power takes place, it'll transfer to an occupation force, and some of the combat forces will leave, some other forces will come. But I believe there's real problems ahead here for Putin, Neil. I mean, think of this. I mean, in 2014, Yanukovych was in charge of the country. He was a Russian stooge, executing Putin's desires, and the people threw him out. He fled to Russia as a result of hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against him. Huge opposition to him. Now the opposition to Russia and any sense of another pro-Russian government, that resistance has actually stiffened. There's considerably more resolve in the country against Russia after all of these 8 years and certainly after this invasion. So I believe Putin's real problem is, while he's being challenged by the Ukrainian military, his problem is going to be the Ukrainian people. He'll defeat the Ukrainian military, but he's not going to defeat the Ukrainian people. They're going to push back on him for as long as it takes until the last Russian soldier leaves Ukrainian soil. That's what's facing Putin, and he's likely absorbed that and believes he can deal with it, just like he believes he can absorb and deal with the sanctions.
Maybe he can't, to your point. Jack Keane, General, thank you very much. Good seeing you again.